Good afternoon and welcome to the Bob Unger Show. We're very lucky today because we have a gentleman who is very rare. He actually has some knowledge, almost impossible to find these days, especially if you look at television and you read a newspaper or a magazine. And Gregory is the author of a book called Inconvenient Facts, which obviously is a takeoff on Al Gore's book that he called Inconvenient Truth, which didn't have very much truth. The subtitle of Gregory's book is The Science That Al Gore Doesn't Want You to Know. And of course, he's not the only one who doesn't want you to know anything. He's got a lot of company. So hopefully, Gregory will help us solve that problem. And I see you're from Arlington.
Our office is located there. My home is Florida, but I'm calling you from Arlington today.
My son recently moved to Arlington and has a condo there that you'd have to pay 3 times as much in New York. Get a lot more value there. And Virginia is a strange place because there's a lot of socialism there, but in other areas of Virginia, not so much. So at any rate, Gregory, let's talk about your book. Give us a little summary of the premises and the basis for the book, and then we'll get into more detail.
Yeah, I didn't set out to write a book at all. The book was the result of my own personal search for the truth. I knew as a geologist that some of what we were being told about climate change was just wrong. I suspect that other things were. And so this was a deep dive that I did. And I said, I'm going to go back to the base data. I'm going to find out. I'm going to go back, look at the data itself, figure it out, see what it tells, see what the science, the facts, and the data tell me. And frankly, what I found angered me. I found science being abused and manipulated. Statistical shenanigans and sleights of hand were being used to present information in a way that just wasn't supported by the facts. And it was this that led me to write my book. I've been told it's now in its sixth printing. And it's been as recently as early November, it was a #1 bestseller on Amazon in several categories. Of course, that helps whenever your Candace Owens adopts your book and champions it. So she had me down. It was great to be down to an interview with her down in Nashville. Just a wonderful lady, by the way.
Yeah,
just as nice as she comes across. So, but the book itself has been an eye-opener for a lot of people. It's very easy to read. It's Inconvenient Facts. I've been told by a number of people it's the best book they've ever read on the subject. And so I wanted to make it approachable and readable by every Joe and Jane, just regular people in the street. You don't have to be a scientist. There's a lot of science in it, but hopefully I made it understandable and something that people can relate to and understand. And I'm in the process of writing my second book now. I've been so busy though. Leading I'm executive director of the CO2 Coalition now. It's a group of more than 80 of the top scientists and engineers and energy experts. We work on climate change and write scientific papers on climate change. Our most recent publication was called Virginian Climate, Separating Fact from Fiction. And we're going to be doing regional studies. And the first one we're going to do will be New England. They'll be very similar. We were going to do some of the bigger states we'll do. And we looked at the New England states, and so many of these your states, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, are just so small that it was better to look at this as a New England as a whole. And what we're going to do is, just like Virginia, we're going to take actual data from New England, looking at the temperature stations to find out what's actually going on there. And Virginia was fascinating. We found that the actual temperature data here in Virginia today is lower than it was in the 20s and 30s. And the temperature is going up and down and up and down and up and down. We did see that there was an increase in nighttime temperatures, which is a good thing. That's where the frosts happen. That's when killing frosts occur. So we get fewer of those at nighttime. That's a good thing. It means longer growing seasons, more harvests. And then we look at crop growth in Virginia. We're going to do that for New England as well. It'll show us exactly the same thing, that crop growth is in your crops in the area are breaking records year after year after year. And we see that all around the world. Virtually every country we look at, that's a good thing. And it's because of modest warming. And it's mainly because this growth is turbocharged by increasing carbon dioxide levels that we're being warned is dangerous. And this increase in CO2 leads to what's called the CO2 fertilization effect. So we just, I look at, by almost every metric we look at, our ecosystems and humanity are thriving and abundant and prospering. And I call it the biggest untold story of the 21st century, is this thriving of the earth. And again, it's just opposite of what we're being told, isn't it? We're being told.
Yes, it is. Well, my wife is a scientist. She has a PhD and a postdoctorate, and she did mostly genetic engineering. And we're kind of like unusual because I'm great with language and I'm horrible in math and science, even though I went to the Bronx High School of Science. And she's very good in math and science, which is not usual based on statistics. Now, what is the most disturbing about what people will say about you and what they say about anybody who asks any questions whatsoever is that you don't follow the science. Remember, Fauci said he is the science? And I had people all over social media and the internet saying that this medical doctor I interviewed just a few weeks ago, who has a degree from Yale, he's a lawyer and a medical doctor for 45 years. They said he should be arrested and incarcerated for expressing his sincere, honest opinion. And people will say the same about you. They'll call you a murderer. You're a murderer. I've had this before. And how do you deal with those attacks? And are you concerned, as I am, about the entire reversal of scientific inquiry? Science is a constantly evolving concept.
Well, we get attacked a lot. I do in the CO2 Coalition. But, the old saying in World War II, if you're taking heavy flak, you're right over the target. And so, for example, last week, our Instagram account that we had just started, we got banned and deplatformed before we could post our first post. They said, before we could even post, we went to sign in. And they said, you violated our terms and conditions for Instagram. We're like, what? What do you have to laugh about it. And I got banned on LinkedIn 6 months ago. I'm a scientist. I post factually correct information that doesn't happen to agree with this narrative of man-made catastrophic warming. And they just started removing each one that I would post. And I was posting things from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, from NOAA, from NASA. So what we found was that my very last post on LinkedIn, I said, I think I'm about to be banned and deplatformed. They removed that post, called it false and misleading, and then banned and deplatformed. Now that's funny. You can't make this stuff up. And
I'm surprised they didn't call you a white supremacist and a Nazi.
Well, I've been called worse. And no, but I'm a scientist, and This book I'm writing now is really a big expose on this narrative, and you've probably heard of it, that our temperature today is unusual and unprecedented, that we haven't had these kind of temperatures in thousands of years. And I went back and I looked, starting with Dr. Michael Mann at Penn State. He was, of course, Mark Stein is in a lawsuit that they've been locked in for, I think, 8 years, because Mann said that Mark Stein said that Mann should be in the state pen, not Penn State, which is pretty funny. And but he's been a law. I didn't say that. I'm quoting Mark Stein, because Dr. Mann is very litigious. So Dr. Mann, if you're listening, I did not say that. I was quoting someone else. Okay, and it's in court documents, so I'm allowed to say that. You got to be careful when you work around. He's not a very nice person, and it's bad. And I went back. I started with him, blew his work apart. In his 1998-99 classic papers of the hockey stick, it's called, where he showed 900 years of slowly declining temperatures, and then at the beginning of the 20th century, it just shot through the roof. What he did to get to that data, manipulation of data, deletion of data, fabrication of data, using a thing called bristlecone pine for tree ring data, which the authors of the study said, don't use this for temperature, but he did anyhow. And that's what drove it. The statistics he used to create the hockey stick were just unacceptable. And so we use these things called proxy data, and tree rings are one of those proxies. And so what he did was use that anyhow. And Mark Stein also said, the hockey sticks, a reconstruction of temperature using proxy data with two problems: the proxies and the reconstruction. Other than that, you can take it to the bank. And again, I just love that. And so and then there are these follow-on studies that replicated his work. And again, I dove into it and have found just terrible, terrible errors with data turned upside down, used incorrectly, used backwards, just really, really bad information. And that's what I want to do, is expose this.
This interview is very timely because last night I was pumping gas into the car at an increasing price every day. And a few people at the pump near me said, boy, those greedy oil companies.
Nope.
Irresponsible. What is your response to that?
Well, we can look, part of this can be laid straight in the lap of Joe Biden with his energy policies. On the week that he was inaugurated, that was the first week we had imported 0 barrels of oil from Saudi Arabia. We had just, as he was inaugurated, we had just become energy independent, or nearly so. And a little over a year, look where we are. First thing he did was kill XL Pipeline. We're importing almost 600,000 barrels from Russia of oil a day. 600,000 barrels coming in from Russia a day.
We're really punishing them, aren't we?
Yeah, certain terribly. But it's fueling their hard currency. And at the same time, XL Pipeline would have been brought in 830,000 barrels into this country from the tar sands, the Athabasca tar sands of Canada. And it was just 2 other things happened on that same day. He banned additional leasing in the Gulf of Mexico and federal lands, and killed the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge drilling up there, which is probably the largest undeveloped oil accumulation in North America. And then just last week, he killed the National Petroleum Reserve, any drilling there. And what that means, those 2 Arctic projects mean Prudhoe Bay was a giant field. We built the Prudhoe Bay pipeline heading south, and it's nearing its economic life. The Prudhoe Bay production has declined to such an extent, there's barely enough oil flowing through the pipeline to make it economic. Those 2 projects, when brought online, would have extended that pipeline life for many, many decades. And if it's decommissioned, all of that oil is stranded. Now, granted, none of that would occur. We probably see the first oil production in, who knows, 8 or 10 years. but still, we're going to need oil in 8 or 10 years, despite what they say. And we'll be looking back 8 or 10 years ago going, why did they do that? And it's
well, the best advisors that I've read from a geofinancial point of view are energy experts Lee Gehring and Adam Rosenschwag. I think the company is called Gorozen, Gorozen. And they put it,
heard of them.
Yeah, most people never have. But if you read their paper that they wrote in 1999, when gold was $270 an ounce and things were totally different, they predicted in the next 10 years, gold would go to 2,000. And they also, 2 years ago, went all in on energy. And of course, they explain that all of this woke ESG investing, wherein the major corporations, even the financial institutions like BlackRock, are refusing to invest in energy. And they have this utopian, which is really dystopian concept that all we have to do is mine enough lithium. And of course, anyone who has ever looked at a lithium mine, you want to talk about polluting and environmentally unfriendly. It devastates the whole area. I've seen so many lithium mines where, it does do some damage. And so now we're going to kill birds with windmills, and we're going to have solar power and EV vehicles, and that will be the panacea. And it'll be the Green New Deal, and we'll ride off into the sunset. What say you?
Yeah, I'm with you. These EVs, there's so much wrong with them, from the safety and the fire danger to the environmental danger, just to get all the critical elements and critical minerals, they're called, which include the rare earth elements like, I can't even pronounce iterdidium or neuter. I don't know. They're hard to pronounce, but they're
molybdenum.
Molybdenum is one, but molybdenum we don't use for these. I don't think is one that's used for batteries or the solar panels and whatnot. But you will have cobalt, lithium. They're the two big. Lots of copper is needed. We don't talk a lot about that. And then there was a large copper mine just killed by Joe Biden recently. That would have provided a huge amount of copper for us. These, and it's environmental. Most of these, particularly the rare earths, are mined with open pit mines, which are not environmentally friendly. Of course, China doesn't care about that. The secret, it's an open secret, is that these large developing nations like Brazil, India, China, Russia, are all increasing their coal production and coal burning for electricity. It's interesting. Just today, 2 days ago, Russia signed a contract with China to provide them with 100 million tons of coal. And just today, this morning, China reneged on that. Their advisors, because they're so concerned now about the China bank situation, that they don't want to be whatever. They said, we're rethinking this. Yeah, maybe we can buy our coal from Indonesia, which is what it looks like they're going to be doing. So there are a lot of these geopolitical ramifications going on here. And at the beginning of this, I was thinking, again, we get a little bit off of climate change, but Taiwan was at risk. I really thought that it might be in play if Russia moved into the Ukraine, but the economic devastation that apparently is being heaped on Russia, just destroying their economic system. President Xi right now goes, might not be a good idea to invade Taiwan. We don't want that coming down on us.
Well, that would also that would require also going across water, which Russia doesn't have to do to go into Ukraine. So it's quite the same thing. But in terms of the price of oil and the solving of this problem with EVs, where is this going? Because we're not going to have any food if we destroy oil and carbon fuels.
Yeah, I think it's solving itself. And we may be seeing in real time the death of the green energy movement. People understanding that we need more oil, we need more gas, we need to create electricity with coal. And I'm very hopeful that these destructive policies will be take a step backward away from these to look at real world energy solutions. And we still have a large amount of oil and gas in this country, tremendously large, particularly natural gas. I was a co-author of the first comprehensive peer-reviewed paper on the Marcellus Shale of the Appalachian Basin, and also the author of there's a shale above it that you've never heard of, and neither has anybody else. But it's a supergiant gas field, nearly 200 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves, and it's barely been touched. And why is that? Because you just need to go a little bit far deeper to get to Marcellus. So instead of going to this one up here, and that's really good, you could go just a little bit deeper and get something that's really, really, really good in the Marcellus. So we've got that in our hip pocket. And then there's a deeper shale beneath the Marcellus at 8 to 10 to 12,000 feet that again, it's barely been touched, that is ginormous. And we did our work at the Marcellus. When we were doing this in 2008, we looked at the top 15 natural gas fields in the world. And the Marcellus by itself had the same amount of gas in place as the next 14 combined. Think about that. The next 14 largest gas fields, Marcellus is the largest by far, made up all 14 combined equal what we have sitting in the Marcellus of West Virginia, Eastern Ohio, and Northern West Virginia. We'll be drilling this for hundreds of years. And it's a great thing. And we're blessed here in the United States with just the right geology, just the right type of shales. The other continents and countries don't have this resource. The shale has to be just the right kind to get this. And like Poland's got the right kind, but it's hard to develop because it's all busted up, if you will.
Yeah, the problem is, what good is it if we can't access it?
New York banned it, banned pipelines, banned fracking, and it's all based on lies. I debated Josh Fox, who was the producer of Gasland film, the early documentary with made-up staged events. He hasn't debated anybody ever since, because I had the science, the facts, and the data on my side.
I love it when people say no scientist disagrees with man-made global warming. No scientist. You ever hear that a million times?
Oh, yeah. Well, I can tell you we've got more than 80 of the top scientists, engineers, and energy experts in the world here at the CO2 Coalition. And to a man and woman, we'll all argue against this. We're big proponents of the many benefits of increasing CO2.
And what about nuclear, which is much, much cleaner, of course?
Well, we're supporters of nuclear, but we're not supporters of people that say that we need to do nuclear to save the earth, that there's a climate crisis. And so if you want to do nuclear, fine, we're supportive, but don't tell me about this non-existent climate crisis that has to be solved using nuclear. And the other problem with nuclear, it's not really, well, it is a problem. There's no way we're going to have enough energy and electricity, I can't imagine, in the next 20 or 30 years from nuclear. There's some small modular reactors being constructed now, but it has to be on a scale that's meaningful. And we can do that. Right now we see Germany, boy, they did an about face over the last day or two with their energy It was called Energy Wind, that they had embarked on a decade or more ago to transition away from nuclear and coal and to transition to wind and solar. And they're paying the price right now because they were dependent on that natural gas from Russia, and it's been cut off. We see just across their neighbor in France has gone just the opposite. They've embraced nuclear, and they're now getting in France more than 70% of their electricity is from nuclear plants.
What are the main, if you had to list them, what are the main myths that are promulgated by the Al Gore crowd?
Well, the CO2, carbon dioxide, is at dangerously high levels. But if you look, again, I'm a geologist, so I look at the big picture, and I find that the CO2 that we're at right now this morning I looked, it was 417 parts per million today. But throughout Earth's history, the average has been 2,600 parts per million, 6.5 times what it is today. So we're actually at near historically low levels of carbon dioxide. And at the end of the last ice age, we got to critically low levels of less than 180 parts per million. And why is it dangerous? Because at 150 parts per million, plant life can't survive. Now that would be a true climate apocalypse if that happened, and we nearly reached that. So we're liberating this beneficial, we call it the miracle molecule of CO2, that's causing ecosystems to thrive and the human condition to improve because of that.
Do you remember the video of Al Gore lecturing kids that the water would be overwhelming the skyscrapers? Remember that one?
Yeah, well, the water's not going to get any, and it's going to up the Lady Liberty's torch. Well, it's not going to get anywhere near her toes, I can tell you that much. The sea level has risen, world sea level has risen about 8 inches since 1900. That's not very alarming. That would be, if you were standing there, it might get a little above your ankles, all right, from that extra sea level. And the really important thing to understand, and this is based on tide gauges from around the world, we can look at, and we can see that the sea level rise is not accelerating. If carbon dioxide was driving warming, we should see some indication of that starting in the mid-20th century, and we just don't. The sea level is rising today at about the same rate as it was in the early 1900s and late 1800s. So there's no acceleration in sea level rise, and it's rising because of warming. And again, we're in a warming trend, but it's been warming for more than 300 years. And the first 250 years of that had to have been naturally driven, entirely naturally driven. But they'll tell you, well, yeah, but that all changed in the middle of the 20th century. Now it's driven by CO2 increases. No, it's not. No, it's not. That's not how science works. And that's not how climate works.
Well, in the 1800s, we had all those cars all over the place.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Let's just think, if we look 300 years ago, that was the depths of what was called the Little Ice Age. And not far from where I am, here's George Washington's home place at Mount Vernon. And Martha liked to have ice in her tea during the summer. And so George dug a well and lined it, and it was their ice house. And he would have his enslaved workers go down on the Potomac, and it froze over every year, and they would cut the ice, thick ice, and they bring it up to the ice house and store it there for them to use in the summer. Well, think about that. The Potomac rarely freezes over, maybe every 10 or 15 years up here now. But back then, because it was the Little Ice Age, it got really cold. And again, looking back through human history, which is what I like to do, and part of my next book is exploring that. Looking back 5,000 years to the rise of the first great civilizations and empires, the Babylonians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, these great civilizations rose up during one of the 3 previous warm periods. It was much warmer than it is today. they were growing a crop called millet in Scandinavia, which can only be grown in subtropical places today. And so we know it's a lot warmer, and all these great civilizations rose up. It was called the Bronze Age, and then it started getting cold. And within as short a period as 100 years, all of these civilizations collapsed. It was called the Late Bronze Age collapse. And again, all these, and we went into what was called the Greek Dark Ages, where we really don't know much in that period about what happened. It was several hundred years, actually 400 or 500 years of just nothing, because they lost all the writing and cuneiform and all that, just nothing was captured. And it really didn't start improving until the Roman warm period. The Romans, great civilizations rose up. And again, other civilizations around the world at the same time. And again, the Roman Empire, there were a lot of reasons it collapsed, but it coincided with another cooling phase. And it might be the Germanic peoples that came out of the north that put pressure on the empire, were being driven south because of the temperatures. But nonetheless, what we see are all these cooling events that, as it started cooling, we saw crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation of these empires and civilizations. And so human history and temperature history tell us that we should welcome the warmth and fear the cold, completely opposite of what we're being told. These people don't look past 50 or 100 years. They need to look back through thousands of years to see that the rise and fall of temperature coincided closely with the rise and fall of civilizations.
How did Greenland get its name?
Very good. Well, the Vikings settled that you're going to get me wrong here, 1850, 1250, 1300s, I believe. And then it was abandoned 180 or so years later because it was very green. We know by looking at the crops, they were growing crops there like barley that can't be grown in Greenland today. Eric the Red settled along a lake that actually in my new book I talk about. It was misused for temperature records. So it was much warmer than it is today. And then the cold, we don't know exactly. They just stopped hearing from Greenland. I mean the Norway, Sweden, their relatives, Lars and Sven, back home. We don't really know what happened, but it disappeared. It was almost entirely based on this cooling of Greenland.
And what about the dying polar bears and the polar ice caps melting?
Well, they're dying all right, but thankfully they're more being born than are dying, which, what does that mean? Increasing population. You know, these bears live about a 20-year life. And so you'll see pictures of these dying polar bears. Well, yeah, they're animals and they die. And they don't look too good when they're about ready to die, and they make hay of it. I've got a great smartphone app that's free, and you can see a chart of polar bear population history. It's Inconvenient Facts is the smartphone app. So all of your viewers are getting their cell phones out, and I'll go get that. So it's Inconvenient Facts, and so we have it for both Google Play, for both Android and iPhone, and you can get it at the App Store or Google Play. But again, you can get this information, and you can get this chart to show you that there are more polar bears today than there have been for 60 years.
So given the lack of appropriate CAPEX investing, in trying to find and produce oil, where is this heading? If we don't change policy, where is this heading?
Well, I think number one, I wouldn't invest in the big companies because they're idiots. They're going with the CSG movement. They're getting rid of their assets. And who's buying them up? The independents. A lot of these companies that are being funded by the equity funds. The good news is they can operate these properties much more efficiently than Exxon or Chevron or Shell. So they're getting rid of these prospects and these oil producing projects and natural gas, but these independents are sucking them up. So if you can get into look at some of the independents and go there, they're not scared of this. And most of the independents aren't buying into this in the inconvenient and ill-advised notion of man-made catastrophic warming. And I was part of that as a geologist with again in the Appalachian Basin, having gone through the equity funding process several times. And so these are well-run, well-operated, efficient companies producing oil and natural gas efficiently, cleanly, and safely. And so if you're looking for something, I'm not sure who, I'm not going to make any advice. That's not what I do. I talk about climate change, but rest assured, when it comes to actual resources itself, they'll probably be managed better than what a Chevron could do.
And what about geoengineering and Bill Gates?
No, that's really, really bad. It's not occurring. But to even talk about it, the unintended consequences of something like that is just horrific. We have no idea what the consequences might be. And run, don't walk away from that.
Yeah, I noticed that in this area, all the trees are collapsing with no wind. And when I examined the trees where it broke off from the stump, inside, it's almost hollowed out, which is why it collapsed. And I can't figure out how this is happening when there's no wind knocking these trees down.
I would question that, because what I find, and we're doing some studies on this right now. We're seeing the forests across North America and really around the world are expanding. In the United States, we have 50% more standing timber and forested areas today than we did in 1953. And we see that forests are healthy and green. The foresters I talk to, I don't know about that specific area. Maybe it's a beetle or a boring insect or something in there that's killing them. But boy, it's the big story, and probably the biggest untold story of the 21st century is this greening of the earth and expand. We've got a new video. The first video, we've got a research associate in India, Vijay Jayaraj. His first video was called Thriving Tigers. And his next video we're doing are on the forests of India and how they're expanding. And India is one of the hottest countries on earth.
I see. So as we begin to wind down, can you give the listeners or the viewers some points of contact where they can follow your work, get your book? Where do they get your book? Do you have a website, a Twitter account, whatever?
Yeah, we've got, let's start with the book. It's Inconvenient Facts. A lot of people get it on Amazon. If you don't want to pay the exorbitant percentages that Amazon demands, you could buy it at my website, inconvenientfacts.xyz. And that way I get most of the money instead of Jeff Bezos. And that's a good thing, because mama needs a new pair of shoes. And or you can go to, I'm executive director of the CO2 Coalition, and we've got a lot of great information at co2coalition.org. You can take a climate quiz to test your knowledge on climate change. And we've got a climate facts section, and we have a blog there where we have our distinguished membership is extraordinarily talented writing. You'll see a lot there. We've written lately about the Supreme Court ruling that's coming up, about the Ukraine crisis and how it's related to energy and green energy, and also just a number of things. Our man in India writes a lot about energy poverty.
Very interesting. Well, sir, it was indeed a pleasure. Most people, when they meet me, say it's a pressure, not a pleasure. But I enjoyed your knowledge. I'm a knowledge addict, so I always enjoy people who actually can think. And it's very disturbing that your point of view really doesn't get a lot of airing, not from the major media. They act the same way as they did with COVID. It's the same routine. Anybody who dissents is a traitor and a liar, and they're communists and white supremacists. You know, you name the label. And it's so dishonest, the discrediting of people who have tremendous credentials like yourself, but they'll use every mode of discrediting against you and against all people who are questioning things. And, you know, in the 60s, you're old enough, I would think, to remember the 60s. Certainly I am. It used to be question authority. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Radical leftists said question authority. Now, these same people say you can't question authority. They are the authority. And if you dissent, you are some kind of
mm-hmm.
Anyway, I commend you on your work. Keep up the good work. And thank you very much for the interview.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure.